Imagine this thing on somebody, like as I'm here, it's weighing me down. Sef.
From the 16th century, the transatlantic slave trade became a very big and lucrative business. During that period, a lot of slaves were gotten from Africa, with over 3 million of them from Nigeria alone. The truth is, when we talk about the slave trade era, sometimes we are ignorant or intentionally ignore the role that we as Africans played in this. We often tell these stories like the Europeans were the only ones who saw this business as an opportunity to make profit, and ignore the fact that even our fellow Africans contributed a lot to this practice and sold out their African brothers and sisters for things as little as mirrors and umbrellas. In this documentary, I'll be uncovering some truth about the slave trade era that is not being told enough, and try to take you on a journey back in time to learn some truth about this era by visiting a slave warehouse in the Niger Delta where a lot of these events took place about 3 centuries ago. I am currently on a 2 hours drive from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, to Ikot local government area where a lot of Nigeria's history is preserved. And on getting there, I met up with Mrs. Effiong Cyrilla, who served as my tour guide around these historical sites. This is the slave trade warehouse that dates back to about 3 or 4 centuries ago. Coming here felt like I was going back in time as my tour guide told me some sad stories behind the slave trade era. In this exact spot I'm standing was where the slaves were weighed and a mark or name of the owner of each slave inscribed on their backs with hot iron. Some of the stubborn slaves were usually taken to an underground compartment to break them down and put them under the slave master's control. There's a complete film dedicated to this story on my channel. But before we continue the tour around the slave warehouse, I want to also talk about the role that Africans played in this era because we contributed a lot to it. When the Europeans invaded Africa, they were not able to independently enter some parts of Central and West African interior to capture Africans to force them onto their ships to Europe and America. So instead, they relied on some African rulers and traders to capture and bring enslaved Africans from the interior to slave castles on the West and Central African coasts. Many of these traders acquired captives as a result of military and political conflict, but some also pursued slave trading for profit. The truth is, when the Europeans arrived in Africa, they met a pre-existing slave trade system in the continent and took advantage of it to obtain labor for expanding plantation economies in the Americas. By the early 16th century, slavery already played a major role in some Western and Central African societies. West and Central Africa consisted of diverse political and social structures, and they would often conflict over internal politics as well as economic expansion. Because of cultural and ethnic differences such as Igbo, Fulani, Ashanti and others, there were frequent conflicts between these groups, producing captives who could circulate in the existing local slave trade system and eventually the transatlantic slave trade. Europeans went to great lengths to influence African traders and leaders to provide slaves for the transatlantic trade. They were known to form military alliances to instigate fighting and increase the number of captives, and their demand for slaves often expanded the presence of the trade across other African regions. So for many years, African leaders and traders engaged in the slave trade in exchange for items such as clothes, beads, ammunition, umbrellas and many others, while the slaves would be sold in public auctions to plantation owners, merchants and other slave traders in Europe. The majority of these slaves would provide agricultural labor and skills to produce plantation cash crops for national and international markets. The transatlantic slave trade cycle would continue for centuries until various European countries and new American nations officially ceased their participation in the trade in the 19th century. So this is the story of Africa's involvement in the slave trade era, and it has been going on for many centuries ago with the Arabs even before the Europeans invaded the continent.
I'm standing here, it was the scale used to weigh the slaves. There was a scale connected to this back. You just carry the slaves and put them away like chicken. Then the iron nail was used to beat the slaves back. Going to put a cove here. When it is hot, they will bring it out. Then they are going to use it to give the slaves mark and back, so that you'll be able to identify your slaves.
Guys, imagine what slaves were going through. It's heavy. From the slave trade era, even this stuff here is as old as the slave trade, right? It's very old. And it's a very, very historical center, a very historical point that I feel should be given more attention because it has a lot of relevance to the creation of Nigeria, and the suffering of Africans. The sad truth is that we sold ourselves out as Africans, and to date, it is reported that modern slavery is still ongoing in some parts of Africa, according to the Anti-Slavery Society. And although this exploitation is often not called slavery, the conditions are the same. People are sold like objects, forced to work for little or no pay, and are at the mercy of their employers. So, can we say the Europeans are the only ones to be blamed for slavery in Africa? No, because it existed before they came and they only increased it or made it worse. Many people like myself did not have enough information about this before, but my research during the making of this documentary really opened my eyes to so many truths and exposed me to some realities that made me feel really bad. We are truly our own biggest problems in Africa, and until we realize this and choose to work on ourselves, the continent will remain at the same level. Enough of the tribal hate and conflicts. Let us do the right thing and work together as one for the better of our countries and our beautiful continent. I believe you have learned something from this documentary, and I hope you share it with someone. I have more beautiful documentaries and travel contents from Akwa Ibom State and the Niger Delta coming your way soon, so this is the best time to subscribe to my channel and join the wonderful community we are building so you don't miss out on more amazing stories. If you want to support our journey across the Niger Delta region so we can make more films like this, please check the description below, and also follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and let's connect more there. Links are in the video description. Thank you so much for watching, and stay wonderful. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Also check this playlist here to watch more interesting videos, and see you on the next video. Thank you so much for supporting.